Fabulous. Okay, there we
Okay,
go.
new Australian film.
Thanks, Peter.
Hello, new Australian film is about to hit cinemas on March 23rd. A film that I saw at the opening night of the Melbourne International Film Festival, a film called Of an Age. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the writer, director, and editor of An Age, Goran Stolevski. Goran, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine.
Great to talk to you. And it's such an incredible opening night film at the festival. And now it's getting a release, which is great to see. Tell me about the inspiration behind this relationship drama of these two men, the inspiration behind that, and also setting it in 1999 predominantly.
Mm. I was well, it was during COVID when I wasn't doing that much writing, but I was doing a lot of reading. And I was reading some short stories by the writer Lauren Groff, and it's a collection called Florida. And there was one story that was well, very unrelated to what I ended up writing, but it was in the story, a high school boy falls in love with a cadaver in Ireland, and and in this random premise, which is treated in a very human way, he goes to his first ever party in high school. And when I got to that paragraph where he walks into the party, that particular sentence, I just couldn't keep reading because my brain just shot off into my own adolescence. Like as soon as I would read the sentence about he steps into the party, instead of getting to the next sentence, I would just go back to my memory of the one party I ever went to in high school, which was not 1999, it was about 2001 or so. And not just the events of that party, which was very uneventful, but it was more about the mindset of who I was back then and what I thought love was and what I thought love would become and what I thought life would be. And thinking back to so vividly to this kid I was in the context of who I became just a short time later, and then who I am now, and what life has turned into, and what I now think love is, and sex and connection and all these other things. Just out of that kind of tension between those personalities, I kind of started thinking about these two guys in a car with these two different personalities, and the story sort of emerged. And I also thought back to that setting of when I was growing up in Melbourne in the suburbs in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I always felt like life happens somewhere really far away. Anything that's important, happens where Isabella Perez is or Julianne Moore is, not where I am. And I was wondering, I never thought, something from my own life could be cinematic. So I just kind of set myself that challenge of sort of trying to make something romantic and cinematic in the least romantic place in the world, which was suburban Melbourne in the late 90s. And without, diluting it, being very real and authentic to that spot. And 1999 specifically, because it was before, mobile phones really took off and the internet even was still in its infancy, at least in terms of, easy access and so on. And before, like with technology, suddenly it became a lot more easy to access people like you, no matter what subgroup you belong to, but especially as a queer person. Before the internet and mobile phones and apps and things, like it was very possible to be the only gay boy in the village. And if you were going to run into someone like you, it was a miracle. It really was. It was just this one moment that, like, you just wouldn't have words for it. So I wanted to again revisit that space, and it was a special kind of loneliness that came with that experience, but also a special kind of poignancy and electricity when you did meet someone like you. And I think it's I was trying to kind of capture that because I think it's something really exciting and interesting and moving to watch, not just for queer people, but for straight people as well. I've lost count of the amount of straight women that have come up to me at the end of this film and gone, "How did you know my life story?" you know, and I find that I really find that beautiful that the film speaks, outside of the demographics I happen to belong to.
Look, it certainly does. And what impressed me was the somewhat naturalistic sort of dialogue that you put into the film. So I'll ask you to just talk about that developing of that screenplay, and secondly, of the 10-year later postscript, which I found so interesting because you could have easily left it at the end of 1999, and instead you've moved forward.
Mm. Yeah. So with the dialogue, when I got that idea that first time, when I was reading that short story, which I didn't finish until like a month later because I just as- suddenly again these images and words started flooding in. I just rushed to my laptop. It was like 2 a.m. and I started typing it all out frantically. My hands could barely keep up with my, these words that were coming to me. And I ended up writing probably like 60% of the dialogue in that one night, like in a mad manic session. Not in any presentable way, but in terms of notes and things. And then eventually I wrote the idea I had for the story. It was only the 1999 section, so that's what I thought the whole film was going to be. And then when I finished writing those scenes, I realized the script only goes for like 70 pages, which means 70 minutes, and no one's going to make that film. I thought, okay, how do we, what do we do? What do we do? What do I do? And I know through writing it, I kind of was thinking of Before Sunrise as a reference a little bit because that was the first love story I ever watched. That was like 10 or 11. And to me, that was the most romantic film ever. I was convinced when I was 10 or 11 that one day, I would meet Julie Delpy on a train in Vienna and my life would be fine after that. So I was, again, instilling this character with these romantic longings that, I connected to that film. And then I thought Before Sunrise, I wonder what There Before Sunset would be like. And when I realized I need another 25 pages, I was like, all right, let's see 10 years later what happens. And because I'd spent, I kind of had developed that more for myself of what would happen if they met 10 years later. I wasn't really planning to put it in the script, but then I thought, let's try it. And I also thought, especially again, to go back to that initial instinct of sort of exploring love and romance and sex and connection and relationships in the context of what you think they're going to be compared to what they end up being eventually. I just thought now to me the 2010 section is probably even more important because I think that's what this film is really about what time does to you. And the key line in the film is, I remember growing up, I thought I would have all these adventures and meet these amazing people. And it's really about exploring that feeling, and sort of 99 is the setup for it, but really the meat of the story is in the final 25 minutes.
Ah, how very interesting to hear that process. That's terrific. We haven't seen many Australian films that deal with a story like this, so it's great to see that. Were there any issues in getting production behind you and funding, financing, and so on, so to be able to make the film?
No, well, what had happened is before I made my first feature, You Won't Be Alone, which was released last year,
Yeah.
I'd been making short films for 20 years, and I'd made 25 short films.
Hmm.
And I had won every award and festival I humanly could, and still wasn't getting any opportunities. And a lot of people who had done a lot less were getting these opportunities. So I think it came to that point in my so-called career where I think there was a sense that I was owed something, and also because You Won't Be Alone initially wasn't supported at all, and then it was sold to a Hollywood studio. It wasn't supported because it wasn't seen as commercial, but then it was sold to a Hollywood studio for many millions of dollars before it was even shot. So I think there was a sense that I quickly built up a track record, which, especially compared to some of my peers at the time who were getting more opportunities than I was. And I think now, frankly, like in our current cultural context, like being queer and a migrant is actually almost an advantage a little bit. I think there's a lot of pressure for me to play the victim, and I really have never wanted to be the victim, and I don't want to like play that role. I think even as an artist, I think if you are in a minority, you kind of grow up as an outsider, and that's extremely beneficial to being a creative person because you're forced to understand a conception of the world that is not your own because you're surrounded by it. And I think that's an amazing practice for someone who wants to do writing. So to me, it's always been very beneficial to be from outside, the loop with these things. And now I think we are in a time, once you break into a certain bubble, into any of our arts worlds, your minority is seen as a strength and as a point of view that is actually quite interesting. So I think I'm lucky to be living in a time now where this is appreciated. So in terms of getting the financing for this, like it was the opposite to the previous 20 years of my life. It was actually very straightforward. I had to like demonstrate that it was going to be a good film, but obviously there were lots of things. It was still hard to demonstrate all these things, but like I think for a change, people were listening to what I was saying rather than waiting for the next person. You didn't see people's eyes kind of glaze as soon as you turned up and started speaking with an accent about gay kids. It was a very different experience to what it used to be 10 years ago, when if I would
Mm,
write a queer film, I'd be told, oh, well, this could be just a love story between a straight couple. Why don't you just rewrite it as a straight couple and make it
mm.
universal? Now I think even if people don't believe queer love can speak to universal feelings, I think they at least have to look like they do. So I'm like, all right, whatever it takes for you, I don't care. I think I'm making universal stories. Just give me the funding and I'll take over from there.
I like that. That's a terrific way of explaining it. Now, in casting the film, in particular Tom Green and Ilias Anton, finding the right actors to portray your screenplay and your story and your background and so on, that must have been quite a challenge, and especially working with the actors to get it right, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, every film comes with its own challenges. I think even just little complications like, oh, so the lead character is not only like, a queer ethnic boy, he has to age from 17 to 28 and also has to dance. Like, let's do that. So, I kind of, before we started casting, I sort of had plan Bs for everything. I mean, I kind of have plan Bs for everything in every aspect of filmmaking, because things rarely work out, by themselves. You have to sort of protect every idea in advance. So I initially was looking for two different actors to play each of the characters at the different ages, because I wasn't sure if it was going to be possible for it to be just one person.
Mm.
And yeah, we had traditional casting call outs as well as like a separate one. I sort of did a separate casting call out just for queer people who wanted to be actors. They didn't have to like demonstrate uh have a CV or anything or have an agent. I just wanted like as many different, especially if they were like of an ethnic background. I just wanted to make sure everyone had an opportunity and then look for the best. And Tom Green, I found a lot more easily because he has a body of work that's extensive. And I came across his clips just in terms of doing my own research of like every young actor in that age range. And I saw a clip from the film Downriver where it was nothing showy. It was just he's a teenage boy. He's riding a bike. He gets off the bike, walks into a bar, and smiles at someone. And it's not Meryl Streep being hysterical with an accent, but to me, like the hardest acting is literally when you have very simple functions, but you genuinely look like a human being that is living in this particular world. And I believe that you're in a story, so you have my attention. And the thing about Tom is when he looks at even an object or much less a person, it just the object comes alive. Like his attention somehow, he looks like he's genuinely thinking about what he's looking at, and he has an inner life. And then I think when you have someone like that, when you have that set of eyes looking at someone, half your job is done because it's almost impossible not to have chemistry with Tom Green. It's like, when Fred Astaire dances with a hat rack, after a while, you're like, wow, that hat rack is also really good. It's he kind of imbues, he's incredibly aware of everything he's doing. He has incredible self, like control of his own performance, but you're genuinely watching and you feel like all his attention is on the other person, even if it's not a romantic context. Like he has chemistry with everyone, so it's remarkable. And then with Alias, I had seen Barracuda, and I thought he was very good in that, but that's a very different kind of personality to what I was writing, and very different physical type as well. So I didn't think of him for the role. And then when he came through, it wasn't even in the first or second shortlist. He came through like the third or fourth. I was like, oh, he's the boy from Barracuda. I'm like, I mean, he's completely wrong because it's not what I wrote. I wrote like a short, skinny kid. And but let's look at his self tape. He's a good actor. And then just watching his self tape, honestly, was the first kid that like kid, he's 24, but he was the first, young actor where you're watching him and it's like the eyes feel like they've lived a life. It's not like a boy putting on his selfie face and trying to seem cool with his line readings. There's just a sense of, like the way he could convey pain. I believed that it's someone who knows what pain is like. Whereas there was an instinct in a lot of even older actors, but especially young actors, where like a lot of them come from sheltered backgrounds because the arts is still very elitist, you know. And it's not the arts that is elitist. Real life makes it a lot easier for, you know, richer, sheltered kids to enter the acting world. And a lot of the time with these kids, it's like pain is something they crave because it's like fun, and you just, you know, oh, they just want to show it and be seen to be enjoying it. Whereas like when Elias was playing pain, is this thing that's unbearable, and you're trying to get rid of it, and you don't want to show it, but you sense it in him, you sense it in his eyes, and like, you know, it trickles out of him almost unconscious, and that quality is so rare in any actor or at any age range that I was like, well, he has to be in this film somehow. And then I adapted what I wrote of the character to fit him more and his kind of voice and personality and physique. But then something strange happened that in spending a lot of time with him, he started morphing into the personality that was written in the film more and more. So I kind of undid a lot of the changes. And yeah, I didn't initially believe anyone could play 17 and 28, but then I realized no one can take over from these sets of eyeballs. Like I do, there was no one who could physically match Elias and look 10 years older and blah blah blah. But also, again, that quality in the eyes, there wasn't another actor who could take over and just felt like it's the same through line for a viewer watching it. You'd have to reset essentially. And I don't think you can really reset an emotional journey 75 minutes into a film. So I was like, all right, let's try it with these guys and see what happens. And yeah, it was like the most moving thing in my life. I watched this boy grow up, you know, on my set in this film, and like even he was stunned at how it felt to be, you know, 28 essentially, and it was just really beautiful. And I'm just very lucky, really.
Well, congratulations on that, because they really work so well together. And in this film, I know that I've got limited time, so just to conclude, I was also impressed by your film "You Won't Be Alone." So it's how interesting you've chosen two quite different sorts of films. Um, are you working on another one at the moment?
Yeah, I'm just finishing the third one, actually. I'm just about to do the sound mix in the next few weeks. So this one's very different again. My next film, it's also in Macedonian, but it's set in present day Macedonia, and it's kind of like a drama with comic elements about a very chaotic family of queer people living in present day Macedonia in the capital. And it's a co-production with a bunch of other countries, including Australia. So we're finishing the sound here in the next few weeks, and yeah, hopefully we get to talk about that one in a few months.
Sounds terrific. I must just ask you, uh, what was it that inspired you to become a filmmaker in the first place?
I grew up as a film nerd. So when I came to Australia, I was 12 years old. I didn't have any friends, and I started watching film movies obsessively. Firstly, just borrowing them from the local library on VHS, and then going to the movies as well. And it kind of escalated. Like I was watching, like my friends were, you know, Ingmar Bergman and Katharine Hepburn when I was 13, 14. I didn't have real life friends. And initially, it was just an obsession that I thought, you know, I didn't think it was viable for me to want to be a filmmaker, and especially as a migrant kid, you know, you can only be a lawyer, doctor, engineer, right? And then like towards the end of high school, I did a media studies subject where you were forced to make a short film. And I knew that I would be, so I was like, all right, one time in my life, I'll make a short film. And I was 17, and by the time that short film was finished, there was no chance that I was going to be doing a law degree or an engineering one. So I went into film. I did creative arts. VCA rejected me 3 times in a row, but eventually they let me in for postgrad. I did an undergrad at Melbourne Uni in creative arts in between. And then, yeah, this was almost 20 years ago now. I just like had it for a really long time.
What an interesting journey, and it's so great that you are a filmmaker and you've got two great films behind you now, and especially Of an Age, which is releasing in Australian cinemas on the 23rd of March. Goran Stolevski, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thanks so much, Peter. This was such a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye. All the
Bye.
best.